Die Hard, the 1988 action thriller directed by John McTiernan, stands as a cornerstone in cinematic history. Starring Bruce Willis as the iconic New York cop John McClane, the film departs from traditional action movie norms by presenting a vulnerable and relatable hero. Set during a Christmas party at Nakatomi Plaza, McClane unexpectedly finds himself battling a group of terrorists led by the cunning Hans Gruber, played by Alan Rickman. Fueled by a smartly crafted script, sharp dialogue, and intense action sequences, Die Hard transcends its genre, earning a well-deserved reputation as a classic that continues to captivate audiences and influence subsequent generations of action films. You might already be a Die Hard fan, but what are some fun trivia points you may have missed out on? Join us as Facts First presents This Scene Wasn't Edited. Look closer at the Playmate in Die Hard. Check out the Playmate. There's a famous scene in Die Hard when John McClane is trying to move from the elevator shaft to the air vent. He looks at a Playboy centerfold, and this has an interesting story behind it. The Playmate in the centerfold is Pamela Stein from November 1987. Later in the film, you see another Playboy Playmate, Kim Mallon, who plays a hostage. In another scene, there's a lady who runs past McClane to meet another passenger. This lady is none other than Playboy Playmate Terry Lynn Doss. For a film full of action, there were quite a few hot models at play. How Alan became Hans. The famous villain of Die Hard is Hans Gruber, played by Alan Rickman. This was his first feature film after working for several years in the theater. But did you know Alan originally rejected the role? He had recently arrived in Hollywood from England and wasn't too keen on his first role being a villain in an action film. Such roles are often shunned by serious actors, and it was no different for Alan Rickman. He was also worried he'd be typecast for the rest of his career in case he took on such a role. But he eventually decided on it and became a star from the film. While he played many villains during his career, he was luckily never typecast. It was challenging for him to take on the role. Each time his character had to fire a gun, Rickman flinched, but he managed to convey one of the greatest Hollywood villains of all time. By the way, you might have wondered why they chose an Englishman to play a German villain. Well, most of the actors who played the henchmen weren't German and couldn't speak more than a few words of Deutsch. Rather, they were chosen for their height and intimidating presence. Yippee KI Yay. While John McClane wasn't Bruce Willis's first role, and he was already an established actor, this was the role that became his favorite. No wonder he reprised it for so many sequels. Bruce Willis took the role very seriously. He met with several cops to study their mannerisms and understand their psyche. In fact, he was most known for his role in the TV series Moonlighting, which was a comedy. He was mostly associated with comedy, and the film's producers were worried audiences would think that Die Hard was a comedy film. For several posters, his face was removed, despite the fact he was the star. But once the film was released and became a hit, it was clear Bruce Willis was also a bankable action star. Nothing lasts forever. One thing only Die Hard fans of Die Hard realize is that the film is based on a novel called Nothing Lasts Forever. The novel's rights were originally owned by Clint Eastwood, who wanted to make it into a film and direct and star. Eventually, screenwriter Jeb Stewart was hired to adapt Roderick Thorpe's novel. Thorpe was a private detective who also wrote a few novels, of which this one became such a huge hit. The characters he created with Nothing Lasts Forever became such a huge hit they were able to spawn several sequels. Who's John McClane? Apart from Bruce, there were other actors originally considered. Michael Madsen, known primarily for his role as Mr. Blonde in Reservoir Dogs, was originally considered. Al Pacino was too. Richard Gere was going to play John McClane at one point. Nick Nolte turned the role down. It was quite risky to choose Bruce Willis, as he wasn't as big of a star compared to these other actors. But the decision turned out for the best, and this was the film which forever solidified him as a star. Other actors considered for John McClane included Tom Berenger, Robert De Niro, Frank Sinatra, Burt Reynolds, James Caan, Harrison Ford, Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Michael Keaton, Don Johnson, Jeff Bridges, and Mel Gibson. $5 million. Bruce Willis's salary at the time was $5 million. This may not seem like much compared to today's Hollywood salaries, but it was quite an unusual and controversial salary for the time. The film cost $28 million to make, and $5 million for an actor who wasn't a star at the time was seen as shocking. It also established that now more actors would demand higher salaries. Not everyone was happy about this high payment, and perhaps this is one of the reasons why films today cost so much to make. One thumb up, one thumb down. When it was released, Siskel and Ebert were the biggest film critics in the country. While Gene loved the film, Roger Ebert was a huge critic. He especially didn't like the character of Chief Dwayne T. Robinson, which he felt was too goofy and a waste in the film. He never showered praise on Die Hard and never changed his mind. But he liked and praised the later sequels for the film, though he passed away before he could see Live Free or Die Hard. Are you folks German or Irish? As we mentioned, the villains were all German, but what about when the film was released in Germany and dubbed in German? In the German version, the villains became Irish. This was due to not wanting to stereotype Germans as terrorists in the film. However, when Die Hard with a Vengeance was released in the country, Hans Gruber's German heritage is mentioned. John McTiernan originally turned it down. Much of the credit for Die Hard's success must go to the excellent direction of John McTiernan, but he originally turned it down. He felt the film was nasty and a bit too violent for his liking, especially after making his blockbuster film Predator. But he eventually agreed to take the film if he could lighten the tone slightly. Looking back, one of the most popular aspects of the movie isn't just the action, but also the rich, dark humor, and John McTiernan played a huge part in this change. Much of the film was actually improvised, and this helped add to the humorous tone. The supporting cast. One of the highlights of the film was that the supporting cast members got a lot of screen time. However, it wasn't done out of generosity, it was for practical purposes. Bruce Willis had to balance working on Die Hard with his role on Moonlighting. As a result, many of the supporting cast members, like Reginald VelJohnson, Hart Bochner, Devereaux White, William Atherton, Clarence Gilliard, Grand L. Bush, and Robert Davi, were all given more screen time. This also added to the film's success. Most action films only focused on the hero and villain, but Die Hard and its sequels also put a heavy emphasis on supporting characters. All the world's a stage. So who should get credit for the fantastic plot of Die Hard? It surely must be novelist Roderick Thorpe. But apart from him, one other great writer must get credit, the bard himself, William Shakespeare. The original story was supposed to take place over 3 days, but it was condensed into one night. This took inspiration from Shakespeare's play A Midsummer Night's Dream, which also takes place over one night. So when it comes to taking down terrorism, you can always count on good old William Shakespeare for inspiration. Now it's time to hear from you. Are you a fan of the original Die Hard film? Do you think it remains the best of the franchise? And why not? Is it a Christmas movie or not? Weigh in the comments section below.